This week we continue our journey through the 5 solas of the Reformation, and this morning is Solus Christus, by Christ alone, and the reading comes from the book of Hebrews. Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast to our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who in every respect has been tested as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore approach the throne of grace with boldness, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need. Every high priest chosen from among mortals is put in charge of things pertaining to God on their behalf, to offer gifts and sacrifices for sins. He is able to deal gently with the ignorant and wayward, since he himself is subject to weakness, and because of this he must offer sacrifice for his own sins as well as for those of the people. And one does not presume to take this honor, but takes it only when called by God, just as Aaron was. So also Christ did not glorify himself in becoming a high priest, but was appointed by the one who said to him, "You are my son. Today I have begotten you." As he says also in another place, "You are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek." In the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to the one who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverent submission. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he had suffered, and having been made perfect, he became the source of eternal salvation for all who obey him, having been designated by God a high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. Word of God, word of life. Thanks be to God. I always think you guys get nervous when I start laying out my pages. How many pages does she have today? There is a 2-part process for entering seminary to be trained as a pastor or deacon or church musician. The first part is academic, getting accepted into the school based on college transcripts and so on. And the second part is admission into candidacy for ordination, where it is determined if you are a sound candidate to be a pastor or a deacon. They don't want you making that decision alone. This part involves a very long essay and an interview with your synod's candidacy committee. 20 years ago this month, I was about 6 weeks into my first set of classes when I met with the candidacy committee in a classroom in the Northwestern building on the Luther Seminary campus. There were 6 of them, men and women, clergy and lay leaders, and I was terrified because I was still surprised to find myself in seminary, much less before a board of inquisition. The interview went well enough. Most of the questions were about my sense of call, my faith story, how I grew up, and so on. And then a large and imposing pastor squared his shoulders at me and said, "Why Christ? Why the theology of the cross?" He asked it like a dare. I had never heard the phrase theology of the cross in my life. I had no idea. Tim, you're laughing, but you know. I had no idea what he was talking about, and so I answered the first part, "Why Christ?" as best I could. I have no memory of what I said, but I have a clear memory of feeling like a complete idiot. When the questions finally came to an end, I was asked to step out while they deliberated my fate. And after what felt like an eternity, what was probably more like 10 minutes, they called me back in and told me I had been approved for candidacy for ordination, whereupon I promptly burst into tears. It was a strange and funny and happy day. But I came away with a question that I've been struggling to answer for 20 years. Why the theology of the cross? First, I had to learn what the theology of the cross is. It is basically solus Christus, by Christ alone, and the revelation of God and the suffering and the humility of the cross of Jesus. Sometimes a contrast helps us learn. The theology of the cross is in stark contrast to what was happening in the church in Luther's time and still happens in parts of our church today, and that is the theology of glory. The theology of glory upholds that God is revealed to us in glory, in riches, and in beauty, that faithfulness is rewarded by material wealth, and similarly that material wealth is a sign of God's blessing. It's true, Lutherans agree that material wealth is not something we achieve on our own, but through the wit, will, and skill granted us by God. In fact, we believe that everything we have is a gift which finds its source in God, but we do not believe that wealth is a sign that someone is more blessed, more faithful, or closer to God. The theology of glory would go so far as to say the more you have, the more blessed you are, the more faithful you must be. And if you believe more, you'll have more. Instead, the theology of the cross upholds that it is in the cross that God is most fully revealed. Through the life, suffering, and death of Jesus Christ, we most clearly see who God is for us, and who we are to God. No longer cast down by want or need or suffering, we are instead drawn into the very aching heart of God. The book of Hebrews opens with the beautiful and haunting words. Long ago, God spoke to our ancestors in many and various ways by the prophets. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by a Son. He is a reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being, and he sustains all things by his powerful word. Jesus Christ is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being. Jesus Christ, who lived as a working man, who walked long, dusty miles with his companions, who laid his own hands on the untouchable. I think I'm getting a dead mic up here, so can we turn this one on? Feels like it's clipping out. Thank you. That kind of interrupted the mood, didn't it? I'm going to go back. Jesus Christ is the reflection of God's glory and the exact imprint of God's very being. Jesus Christ, who lived as a working man, who walked dusty miles with his companions, who laid his own hands on the sick and untouchable, who ate with outcasts, who was arrested, beaten, and executed, nailed to a cross on the grubby, barren outskirts of town among common thieves and insurgents. One cross among hundreds. This is the reflection of God's glory. This is the imprint of God's very being. This is the theology of the cross, solus Christus, by Christ alone, that God is revealed to us most clearly in the suffering and death of Jesus, that God is present to us in our own suffering in personal and particular ways, that God is present among those who have been thrown away by society, with those whose homes have been destroyed by fire, hurricane, or earthquake. The theology of the cross moves God from the limits of great cathedrals and seats of power onto battlefields and into orphanages, among the street children in the potter's field with unmarked graves of the lost and forgotten dead. Solus Christus, by Christ alone. Yes, we can see God in the glory of the autumn colors in the valley, and in the bounty of a supper table, and in the beauty of children singing. Martin Luther never contested that. But he stood firm against a church that had become a mighty machine, extorting money from the poorest of poor to build the greatest cathedral of all time as a testament to the church's power, the church's faithfulness, and the church's closeness to God. They had embraced the theology of glory, that wealth and grandeur signified God's nearness and blessing. The church leaders had lost their way and wielded the church for political power. And Martin Luther said, no. We live in a strange time, a time when the theology of glory has a central place in our public discourse, even among those who otherwise might not consider themselves people of faith. Too many see wealth and political might as a sign of God's special blessing. Political leaders claim God's blessing as though it were a birthright based on geography. Solus Christus. Our salvation comes through Christ alone. Christ on the cross, God revealed in suffering. This isn't grim news. This is not God revealed only in darkness. Instead, the cross is an inbreaking of the new narrative we talked about last week. God revealed in the cross is God coming as close to human beings as is possible, to feel with us, work with us, walk with us, love with us, celebrate with us, suffer with us, even die with us. Imagine what a glorious revelation that was to people being crushed by the greed of those in power, erecting edifices to their own egos. Imagine what a glorious revelation this could be to our own neighbors, to those who have been told for too long that who they are is a sin, that their lot in life is their own fault, and that they are nothing more than the circumstances that limit their futures. The proclamation of the theology of the cross, Solus Christus, is what we do here. That is the ministry we are called into by God. We bring the good news of the cross and the joy of being God's own beloved to those who most need to hear it. We gather to hear it for ourselves and to be liberated by it. And liberated, we tell the story to set others free, to be set free into fulfilling God's vision for the kingdom of heaven. This week, we start a time of reimagining how we support the mission of God at Trinity through our financial offerings. We reimagine how we come together with whatever we have to offer, and we all have something to offer, and how those shared gifts are put into the service of bringing the good news of a liberating cross to each other, to our neighbors, and to our community, because that is what we do. We worship a God fully present to us in and through all that life offers, the sublime, the sacred, the scary, and the sad. We pass on the stories of Jesus to our children and our grandchildren, reminding them that they bear an indelible identity marked by the cross that nothing in this world can erase or overshadow. And we gather together to serve those the world might have forgotten. We walk alongside those who have been left out of the glory story. We remind them that the love of God is present in warm socks, a hot meal, and someone fighting for their right to be here. Our shared financial offerings make all of that possible. Whether you are among those who have the gift of making money, or you are among those who fear you have only what you need, your participation is what makes us a community in service to God together, supporting the powerful word that God is for all people, that no one is excluded and all truly are welcome. That's what we do here at Trinity. We don't always get it right, but we try and we learn and we listen deeply to the call of God to be kingdom bearers, bearers of the life-giving cross of Jesus. Amen.